grandpa stole his first buggy in 1892. I met your grandma pig slopping in 46.
Oh, every Christmas we'd visit my Uncle Fred in prison.
And welcome, America, to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth, on the program where we shake your family tree and watch the nuts fall out. Well, it's one of those days where we have incredible stories, ordinary people with extraordinary finds, and you'll be amazed by what these two have done with these stories. First, coming up in about 10 minutes, we're going to talk to Robin LaCroix. She is with the Massachusetts Society of Genealogists, and she has found out that her grandfather was, shall we say, very involved in the neighborhood back in the day. And you're not going to believe the story she has to tell. And then later in the show after that, we're going to talk to Steve Gruber. He's a man from Elkhart, Indiana. His story involves a lockbox left by his grandfather hidden under the floor in his grandfather's shop from back in the 1940s. What did that lockbox contain? What did it lead to? You're going to want to hear what happened to Steve. Hey, and if you haven't signed up for our weekly Genie newsletter yet, just go to our shiny new website, ExtremeGenes.com, and get your name in there. We'll be happy to get it out to you every Monday morning. And you can also sign up for our courses there. Right now, it's time to check in with Boston and David Allen Lambert, the chief genealogist of the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org. Hello, David.
Hello, Fish, and how are things with you these days?
You know, pretty darn good. Keeping busy. I'm working on that cold case we talked about last week, and those are always interesting to me. And how about you?
Well, I've been keeping busy here at work at Boston at NEHGS, and I've got some lectures lined up for later in October. I'm going to be lecturing on October 23rd with the Dallas Genealogical Society. And you can find out more at DallasGenealogy.com. You don't need to be a member of Dallas Genealogical Society to find out.
Good luck with that. And by the way, I hear Melanie McComb had her final results on the Wiki Tree Challenge the other day. I didn't catch it, but hopefully you did. Did she have a big reveal?
Well, I would say that Melanie is probably the best person to ask on that, but it was exciting to say the least. I think every one of these WikiTree challenges, from yours to mine and all the other ones, prove, genealogy isn't done by one person.
Nope.
I was grateful for my surprises, as I'm sure Melanie has been for all of the ones they revealed to her the other night.
Exactly. All right, let's get on with our Family Histoire news today. Where do you want to start?
Well, I want to start with a surprise collection that I didn't even know existed. I do a lot with the Civil War, Fish, as you can imagine. We know in the Civil War, of course, the Confederacy used enslaved labor in a lot of cases, but I didn't realize there actually were payrolls that survived, because so much of the things from the Confederacy have been lost. The National Archives have these payrolls, and it have the names of the enslaver, the names and occupations of the hired enslaved person, the days hired, how much they were paid, the signature of the person receiving the payment. And you can find all this at the National Archives in their digital collection under Confederate Slave Payrolls. And it's under Archives Identifier number 719477.
There's like 6,000 of these things. So
there are 6,000 of them. I know I sent you the article about it, and it's great. I think that this is just one more set of records that might give a clue or may help you substantiate a family story that you may have heard. Well, digging into genealogy is always great. And, of course, I always love to hear the stories archaeologists have because, they're digging into our ancestral past. I don't have a connection to Roanoke Island, but the story of the Lost Colony has always fascinated me. And recently, this past month, there's been archaeological digs going on looking for a forge where they believe the fortress may have been for Roanoke. So more on that as it is uncovered. I think it's great with DNA. So many people are finding their birth parents, that they're adopted. This is a great story. A gal in Utah by name of Kara Miller was walked down the aisle by both her dads. She had used MyHeritage a couple of years ago and found her biological dad. Her biological dad walked her the first half down the aisle. The other half of her walk was by her adopted dad. And that is just a great little story. That's
fantastic. Isn't that great?
Yeah. Well, this next story makes it seem like you just can't take gravestones for granted. This story comes from Michigan. At an estate sale, somebody turned over a piece of marble that was in the kitchen. They were selling everything out of the house. And it turns out this piece of marble had inscriptions on the back. Yeah, it had been a gravestone for a Peter Weller from 1849 in Lansing, Michigan. His gravestone was thought to have actually been moved with his body to Mount Hope Cemetery. His body may have been moved, but his gravestone never did. For 146 years, it's been in somebody's house, used for, ready? Making fudge.
Making fudge?
The smooth marble surface was perfect and cold for making fudge. You think somebody could have flipped over the stone and saw what it was for. So yeah, gravestones have multiple purposes in genealogy, also for culinary arts.
Who knew? That's crazy.
Folks, please do not go to the local cemetery and attempt to make fudge on the back of Grandma's gravestone next week.
Wow.
Okay? That's not a good idea. I have a great story about cleaning up trash at the beach. Well, in this case, it's a little further. It's in the ocean. Divers went in Spain and were cleaning up trash in the ocean and thought they found some shiny, probably a bottle cap or something. Turned out to be a hoard of 53 gold Roman coins.
Wow.
The largest hoard fish ever recorded in Europe that's been found, especially in the ocean. They're not sure how they got there, but they date back to the 4th and 5th centuries. Probably they were hidden from a barbarian looter. Maybe somebody threw the box overboard and into the water, thinking that they would go down and fish it out later. Well, it took a little longer for them to fish it out as these divers. It really goes to show you it pays off to be green.
Yes, it does. Absolutely.
Well, that's all I have this week from Beantown. And don't forget, if you're not a member of American Ancestors, we invite you to use the coupon code EXTREME on AmericanAncestors.org and save $20 on your membership.
All right, David. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you at the back end of the show for Ask Us Anything. And coming up next, we're going to talk to another Massachusetts resident, Robin LaCroix, who I would call an ordinary person with an extraordinary find. Wait till you hear what she has to tell you. Coming up next when we return in 5 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show.
Have you hit a brick wall in your family tree? Are you unsure how to use your DNA test results to resolve a research question? Do you want to travel where your ancestors walked and need to find details before you go? Need help joining a lineage society? Whatever your genealogy research question, the answer is Legacy Tree Genealogist. Legacy Tree Genealogist has been helping clients all over the globe discover their story since 2004. Legacy Tree has carefully selected and trained professionals who specialize in hundreds of countries and languages, as well as probate research and DNA analysis. And when you need experts on the ground in the countries where your ancestors came from, Legacy Tree Genealogists calls upon its global network of on-site researchers who know the local language and how to get their hands on the records you need. Request your free quote today at legacytree.com. That's legacytree.com.
Genies, if you haven't done so yet, you've got to check out Ancestry.com's new storytelling creation center, Ancestry Stories. Their story builder allows you to create a story with 6 different slide types, including a title page, a photo display page, including stock pictures they provide, and documents. And you can write a summary. And with those photos, you can add motion, panning left to right or right to left. For now, these stories can only be created on your iPhone, but Android is still to come and can be saved to your ancestors' pages on your trees. You can then access via phone, and in time, it'll appear on your desktop. You can also share it with family members and friends, whether or not they subscribe to Ancestry.com. For the younger generation that wants stories in a quick and easy-to-consume form, you can't beat this. I've already shared a story with my family, and the reactions are remarkable. Try out these incredible new tools and share your new story creations on social media using hashtag MyAncestryStory. Hey, Genies. As we've dug into our family history explorations over the past year, our community at Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies has taken off. This is where you can meet like-minded genealogists who can help you break through those brick walls and find a whole city behind it, occupied by ancestors whose names you don't even know yet. This is where you can learn from your fellow Genies and ask questions, because many in our community have already been into some of the records you're looking for. Genealogy and Breakthrough Strategies is free. What a great place for brainstorming and getting to know other people who totally get your passion for family history research. If you're looking to take the next step in sharpening your skills, here's a great chance to learn from others and give back in areas you've already become expert in. So join us. That page again is Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. It's a long name, but we cover a lot of territory. Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. You know, one of the things I always enjoy about Extreme Genes is finding ordinary people with extraordinary finds, and we've got another one for you. She is Robin LaCroix. She is with the Massachusetts Society of Genealogists. She's the vice president of the Bristol chapter there. And Robin, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
You know, you have always had an interest in doing family history, and your little story here starts back in 2013 when you were interviewing your mom and two sisters, and they told you something rather interesting.
Yes. Well, we had known that my grandfather, their father, had had a longtime mistress when they were growing up. But while I'm interviewing them for Family History Stories in 2013, they told me that they had seen the mistress pregnant around 1953.
Aha, and off you go.
Yeah, off we go. And I want to find that baby.
Your mom got involved in this at this point as well, and she's quite a genie.
Yes, she is. She should have been a detective, but she loves family history and genealogy, too. And I guess there had been a few other things that had been mentioned to the girls, the sisters, over the years that led them to think that they had a half-sister who was in the next town.
Okay.
And so Mom, by asking some subtle questions to key people she thought who might know something, she figured out who it might be.
And did it check out?
It did check out. It turned out to be a woman that I had met when I was in my teens, because I had worked with this woman's sister, and I hadn't seen her for 40 years. We did a DNA test. So it turned out she was just 2 years younger than my mom's youngest sister.
Okay.
So she was born in 1944, but she was not the mistress's daughter.
Oh, so this is much earlier then.
Yeah, so as I'm thinking I'm looking for the mistress's child, this turns out to be some other woman's child and not the mistress's. So now I'm still looking for the mistress's child.
Yeah, but you have another mistress here, obviously. What was the clue, by the way, to finding this first sister?
You know, Taunton's a small town, or was back then, and the address that my mom lived at, there was a cottage in the back where they lived, and there was two houses that each had two apartments right out front. And people talk. And the people that lived in one of the apartments were sister to Sandra's mother. And it was just between gossip, and someone finally said, yeah, I think that's who it is.
That might be who it is. All right. So there was your first one. And so you continue the search for the guy or the woman who was born in 1953. Where did it go from there?
Correct. So then I took to Ancestry, and I found a 3-person public tree that had my grandfather's name in the location of where he lived, the mistress's name, and it showed a living daughter whose info was private.
Wow.
I quickly sent her an email and had lengthy conversations with her, and I did discover that she was the mistress's daughter, and my grandfather was her biological father.
Okay. And what year was she born?
So she was born in 43, which was another shock. So still, we don't have the baby from 53.
So this next child of his that you found, how did she know the story? Did she track down her birth mother at some point?
So she did. In the 80s, she had tracked down her birth mother, who eventually told her who her father was, gave her the name, and said, well, he was married with 5 children.
Wow. So now you've got 2 new aunts, And how did they take to all this?
Actually, wonderfully. The first aunt, Sandra, 20 years previous to this, someone had told her and her family that she had a different father, and no one knew who it was or could tell her who it was. So she was actually trying to find out who her father was. So she was thrilled. And the second aunt, Aunt Susan, knew long before we did, because she had figured it out in the 80s. And she didn't want to disrupt our family if no one had known that he had a mistress. So she was trying to be polite. But now she and my mother are thick as thieves. She hasn't missed a beat.
Wonderful. Yep. And then you went looking for the third one. And this is a really interesting thing that I don't think I've ever heard in a genealogical search before.
Well, it wasn't planned that way. So now I'm hounding my Aunt Susan for more information. What do you mean 3 women? What do you mean? Is there 3 babies? We've only found 2. So I became obsessed with that. So as I'm doing searches everywhere, it just so happened that my local historical society was having a psychic fair as a fundraiser. Now, my daughter and my mother, they're both really into astrology and psychic readings and things, but I'm not. I don't put much stock in that. And, I don't want to be fooled. But I did agree to go because it was a fundraiser. It was just going to be fun. And I kind of really did think in the back of my mind, like, okay, well, let's see. Maybe I can reach Grandpa George somehow. So I went. I said, my mom and my daughter, I said, I'm going first. I can't risk you guys saying anything. So I go, and this woman whom I had met for the very first time said, I don't want you to tell me anything about yourself. You're going to answer me with yes, no, or maybe, and that's it. So I'm like, perfect. Well, she begins to describe a man that she has connected to, and he is the exact description of my grandfather. Tall, he's handsome, blue eyes, he's charming. So I knew it was him, and there was no way she could have made that up. She says, if you'd like to ask him a question, you may. I said, sure. I'd like to know, how many children does he have? And she said, well, let me see. And she indicates he's holding up 5 fingers. So she says, 5. She said, does that make sense? I said, yes, it does. So she said, okay, well, wait a minute. He's holding his other hand behind his back. So she closes her eyes, and she then says, now he's flashing 5 fingers on one hand, 3 fingers on the other hand. But he's flashing. He's not just holding them up. He's flashing 5, 3, 5, 3. She says, does that make any sense to you? And I just said, yes. She continued. It got to the time when you get a message at the end of this reading. And she says, I need to give you a message. I expected it to be something like, I love you, you're my favorite grandchild, something like that. But the message was, it's a boy that looks like me. And I said, what is a boy? She said, I don't know. That's all he's saying. He keeps saying, it's a boy that looks like me, a boy that looks like me. I mean, I knew what he was talking about. So my time was up, and she said, I just have to ask you, why didn't he say 8 children? Why would he go 5, 3, 5, 3? And I said, well, probably because he had 5 legitimate children and 3 illegitimate children that his family didn't know about. It was pretty shocking. So my mom goes back into detective mode, and she begins looking at everyone, just everyone she sees in the supermarket, friends, family. Does he look like my father? And literally about a month later, she's cleaning on Saturday morning like she always does, and she's dusting the bar that she has in her family room down in the basement, and she's about to dust off a bottle that she and my stepfather had bought as a souvenir in the Caribbean.
Okay.
So they had a picture of them, my stepfather and the friend, on the label of this bottle. And this bottle's like 20 years old or something. So she dusts it off, and she looks, and she says, he looks just like my father, the friend.
And this friend, how long had your mom known him?
Well, it actually turns out that he grew up next door to my mother.
Oh, boy.
When they were kids. She's known him her whole life. And But then, life happens and they got married and my mom married my father and moved to the next town. And then it wasn't for another 20 years. My mom and dad were divorced and my mom starts dating the man that is now my stepfather. And he says to Mom, I want you to meet my best friend. We've been best friends since we were kids. He mentions the name and Mom said, are you kidding me? I grew up next door to him. This couple and my mom and my stepdad, they're just close friends with these people. They live a mile down the road. They've traveled cross country. They winter in Florida together. And my mother's about to faint because now she thinks this friend is her half brother.
Oh, that's crazy. So did you go through the exercise here of the getting DNA and how did he react to all this?
So he thought it was pretty funny that I had found two half-sisters for my mother. And so we went over to visit and gingerly brought up the subject. And I said, you know how Mom has these new sisters? Oh, yeah, ha, ha, ha. That's really funny. I said, I've been doing more research and I actually think there's a possibility you might be my mother's half-brother. And he laughed. He said, you are crazy. And I said, well, if you wouldn't mind humoring me, I have a DNA test with me. And we did it. We did the test. It came back. It was positive. He's her half brother. And it turned out that his parents had divorced when he was about 2, probably when his dad found out that he wasn't his child. And that's when at 2 years old, the mother gets divorced and takes her 2 children back to where she grew up at her mother's house, which happened to be right next door to where my mother lived and my grandfather.
Wow. So Grandpa got around and none of these were born in 53. Does that leave you with one short?
Yeah, well, does it? I'm not sure because the mistress was adamant that there were 3 women pregnant. And then I have the mediumship reading. He said 3. So is there 3 or is there 4? I'm still looking.
Well, maybe he didn't know either, Robin, What a great story. Unbelievable. She's Robin LaCroix. She's in Massachusetts, an ordinary person with an extraordinary find. It's the gift that keeps on giving, Robin. Great story.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
And coming up next, we're going to talk to a man who discovered that there were some documents hidden under a floor that had to do with the rescue of family members and others caught in the Holocaust. We'll tell you more about it coming up in 5 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Welcome back to Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth. And what a story we have for you today with my next guest, Steve Gruber from Elkhart, Indiana, up near the Michigan border. And Steve is one of these people who suddenly got a phone call one day about a mysterious find in a shop that was once owned by his grandfather and his great-grandfather. Hi, Steve. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Tell me about this lockbox discovery. Who found this thing? How did they find you? It was amazing.
Well, Goshen, Indiana, where my mother grew up and my grandfather lived, is a very small city, and everybody knows everybody. So it was kind of a city ordinance thing that happened. Goshen no longer allowed partial, what we call Michigan basements that had a partial packed dirt floor. So the new owners were preparing that surface to have concrete poured. And there were odd bits of old cement in another part of that basement. And there was a stack of old furniture, an old desk. And so they cleared it all away and they found this lockbox. They were the new owners of the store. And it was several years after my grandpa died.
Right.
And they called my mom and said, hey, we found this lockbox. I was living in North Carolina at the time, and my mom called me and said, what do you think it is? I said, well, I hope it's money. And
well, it was well hidden, wasn't it?
Yeah, very well hidden. And she called a locksmith locally. It had to be taken apart. So Mom said, look, these are affidavits of support. What should we do with them? And at that time, I was running a business and I was not living in this area. So it sat with her for several years. And then I went through them one day and said, oh my gosh. We had known that my grandfather and great-grandfather had sponsored German Jews to come to the country. In fact, there were 3 couples who did settle in Goshen.
During the Holocaust, right? Yeah,
a couple were able to come right before the war. The first was Betty and Herman Lowenstein, and they came in July of 1938. They had seen the marginalization and the terror of the Nazi machine, but the formalization of ghettos and mass extermination hadn't yet happened. So I knew about the effort, and for several years I had tried to pull information out of my grandfather about that. And he would just say, Stevie, why do you have to know such things?
Right.
He told me his dad and he had each sponsored 14 individuals, which in the 30s, even if you were a Rockefeller, that was the max that you could sponsor. And because of the Depression at that time, the policy was you had to guarantee employment and housing in perpetuity. So it was a very expensive, arduous 9-year journey that eventually did get 28 individuals to this country.
Wow. So let me ask you about the documents in the lockbox. Did some of these give you a little more flesh to work with?
Absolutely. A couple of them were family members who later perished that they couldn't get out. And I think that's why it was hidden, because of the shame. Mm-hmm. Because once those BBC newsreels, when they liberated Dachau and Auschwitz, and they began to show the enormity of the Holocaust, nobody knew it was this extensive. And it absolutely horrified my grandfather, because his first reaction is, yeah, I did the max we could, but I wish I could have done more. And, oh, by the way, I had direct relatives who perished that we were not able to reach or in any way sponsor. Oh. So I think he didn't share the story because of shame and regret. Nobody could have convinced him, wow, you did an amazing job, because he just looked at the enormity of it and he thought, well, more people like me should have done more things.
Sure.
And it was about 2000 that the lockbox contents came to my mom, and it was probably 6 or 7 more years before I actually went through them. And it was all kinds of stuff. They had 3 attorneys. One of them, his name was Iggy Roseneck, and he had escaped Germany right before Kristallnacht, and he was a New York attorney, so he was extremely familiar with all of the mounting restrictions. So he advocated for Cuban visas.
Huh. Oh, that's interesting. So was that kind of a workaround?
Yeah, exactly. Some came to Cuba, and then Cuba all of a sudden had quotas. And so they were then sent to South America. One of them stayed. So it showed the tenacity of it and how organized they were.
Wow. So were they part of a group then of folks trying to get individuals out?
No. At that time, Goshen's Jewish community was really eroding. And in Indiana or even Chicago, there weren't really any relief organizations specific. There were a lot of appeals to the State Department. Even the Red Cross wasn't equipped to deal with the communications breakdown, the expense, and the uncertainty. Back then, consulates closed, policies changes, things just went dark. The other thing was assets. You had to put up a $2,500 surety bond for each person you sponsored.
Oh, my God.
Well, back then, that's a lot. That's like $50,000.
Sure, for each one. And your family did this 28 times.
Right. In today's dollars, they spent about $3 million, and who knows what they spent in bribes and other legal fees. We're just kind of looking at the requirements then and the correspondence we have.
How many documents were in the box?
There were 26 different documents, and it spanned from 1937 to about 1942.
Okay.
My great-grandfather died in 1942, so it really fell to my grandfather.
And how old was he at the time?
When he first started the effort, he was 30 in 1937. What really sparked his action was that he and my grandmother took a delayed honeymoon to Europe in 1937. And they went through the Mediterranean, docked at Naples. They were just horrified by Mussolini's Italy. And that even as U.S. tourists, there was curfews, there were restrictions, and just lots of bureaucracy, just even to see historic sites there. They took a train up to Switzerland and then from Switzerland into Germany. The seminal moment was that my grandfather and grandmother were on this train, and when they stopped at the German border, there were customs officials and SS officers who went through the train asking for passports. And this guy saw my grandfather, saw the last name Plow, obviously Jewish, and he didn't believe he was an American. He thought he was traveling on a forged passport. And my grandmother was not in the compartment at that time. So she came back and kind of diffused the situation, showed a label from her coat. This is from Indiana, rifle through her purse. But my grandfather said, Stevie, he looked at me as if I was a piece of rotted meat. He just looked at me with utter hate, and they took him off the train. He finally got back. But as they went through Germany, they started seeing these signs that said Judenfrei, free of Jews, in some of these train stations. And they got to Frankfurt where there was family, and they talked to his uncle and cousins, and they said, yeah, it's bad, but we've been through worse before. You know, the Jews have been persecuted forever, and, you know, this too shall pass. And my grandfather thought, I don't think so.
So tell me really quickly, because we are running out of time, you've put together an amazing documentary with some kids in a college in your area. Tell me quickly about that.
Well, we wanted to put together a testament to these efforts, and Five Core Media put together this thing, but there's even a reenactment sequence and special effects. We thought it would be a 12 to 15-minute local historical video, and it became a 57-minute feature documentary.
Wow. And you're in all kinds of film festivals, too.
Yes. We're in Orlando, Heartland, Miami Jewish Film Festival, the Victory International Film Festival. I just went to that. So, you know, I think the message right now of perseverance in the face of evil is something people need to hear. And as anti-Jewish violence has escalated here, anti-Asian violence has escalated here, I think it's time that people learn that you've got to take a stand and do what's right.
He's Steve Gruber from Elkhart, Indiana. Well said. Congratulations. What an amazing story. A lockbox under a floor hidden turns into this amazing adventure in this documentary. I wish you the best of luck with the story and getting it out, Steve, and thanks so much for your time.
All right. Thanks.
And coming up next, David Allen Lambert is back for another round of Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Genie's 10 years ago, in April of 2012, when the government released the 1940 census, it took Ancestry several months to complete and review an accurate index. Fast forward to today, using proprietary handwriting reading software, it took Ancestry only 9 days to get the job done with the 1950 census. Now, they held back results for a time for actual humans to review what the software had created. And after just a few weeks, it became obvious the software was near perfect, and the computer-generated index to 153,000 names has been released. What does this mean in your journey to research your family? It means you can search the entire database quickly and easily for your family members. Never has a U.S. Census Index been created as quickly as this. Go to Ancestry.com today, click on the 1950 census on the homepage, and see what you can discover.
Have you hit a brick wall in your family tree? Are you unsure how to use your DNA test results to resolve a research question? Do you want to travel where your ancestors walked and need to find details before you go? Need help joining a lineage society? Whatever your genealogy research question, the answer is Legacy Tree Genealogist. Legacy Tree Genealogist has been helping clients all over the globe discover their story since 2004. Legacy Tree has carefully selected and trained professionals who specialize in hundreds of countries and languages, as well as probate research and DNA analysis. And when you need experts on the ground in the countries where your ancestors came from, Legacy Tree Genealogists calls upon its global network of on-site researchers who know the local language and how to get their hands on the records you need. Request your free quote today at legacytree.com. That's legacytree.com.
Hey Genies, as we've dug into our family history explorations over the past year, our community at Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies has taken off. This is where you can meet like-minded genealogists who can help you break through those brick walls and find a whole city behind it, occupied by ancestors whose names you don't even know yet. This is where you can learn from your fellow genies and ask questions, because many in our community have already been into some of the records you're looking for. Genealogy and Breakthrough Strategies is free. What a great place for brainstorming and getting to know other people who totally get your passion for family history research. If you're looking to take the next step in sharpening your skills, here's a great chance to learn from others and give back in areas you've already become expert in. So join us. That page again is Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. It's a long name, but we cover a lot of territory. Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. And welcome back to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. I am Fisher, your Radio Root Sleuth, with David Allen Lambert. And it's time once again for Ask Us Anything, where we answer your questions. And we're going to start with one from Max in Poughkeepsie, New York, Dave. And he says, my family lived in New York and New Jersey back in the day. Are they among the states that had state census records? Yeah, that's an easy question for us.
Oh, yeah, of course. In fact, I think it's really helps out with a state like New Jersey that doesn't have a lot of early records.
Yeah, that's really true. In fact, New Jersey is very difficult, and state censuses there are really important for research in the Garden State.
That is very true. And of course, New York, whether or not your ancestor lived in the Big Apple itself, New York City, or in a place upstate New York, state censuses are valuable for a state that, well, doesn't keep vital records till a little later.
That's true. They actually started doing state censuses in 1855 that I'm aware of. Well, let's see. There was the New York City census that was done that year. Was there a state census, Dave? Do you have that on a list?
Yeah, actually, there were some early ones. In New York, there was one in Albany only, in Albany County to survive, and that's from 1790.
Okay.
But of course, there's a federal census then, too. That's
Sure.
the first federal census. In 1825, there is a census for New York that is for the head of household, and it basically has the number of males and females, etc. So that exists as well. There's a 35, and there's actually an 1845. But again, some of these have very limited returns.
Right.
But you should find all of them on FamilySearch.org, and probably a lot of them on Ancestry.com as well.
You'll find the 1865 New York one is missing many of the counties for some reason. I don't know the reason, but like you say, Dave, sometimes they're just really limited on either what was taken or what has survived.
You know, one of the ones I love about the 1865 is that actually whether or not you had been currently in the U.S. Army or Navy or still in the Army or Navy. So if you had been in the service during the war and already home, it asks that question. Then it also asks who's still enrolled, which is a great military teaser if you're doing Civil War research.
Yes, indeed.
And there were censuses after that. There's actually in 1875 New York State, in 1905, and in 1915. And also 1925.
And I should mention that 1855 New York City census will actually give you the county that your ancestor was born in if they were born in New York State.
Mm-hmm.
And that's helpful.
It really is. Well, I mean, anytime you can find where they're living in between the decennial censuses, the federal censuses, of course, happening like 1790, 1800, 1810, that middle part could be important, especially if your ancestor is an immigrant and coming into the country. They may have not been on, say, the 1850, but they might arrived in 53, 54. They're going to be on the 55.
Sure. And we should mention there's an 1892 New York census.
Exactly. And that census, of course, is great because it has a lot of detail for families that are not, of course, in the 1890 census, which doesn't exist anymore for New York because of the fire.
But there is the New York Police Census from 1890, which replaced it entirely.
That is entirely true. So there's all sorts of things that you can find for the non-federal censuses. And for New Jersey, there's an 1855, a 65, a 75, an 85, a 95, a 1905, and even a 1915.
And those are really helpful because that state is so difficult. Thank you, New Jersey, for making it a little easier of late. Hopefully you'll continue that. We should mention, I think the New York state censuses go up to 1925. At least those are the ones that are available. Do you know if there are any after that just aren't out yet because they're too recent?
I'm not aware if there are, but I wouldn't be surprised that there may be some post-1940 censuses that may have been conducted that may just be sitting in the wings. So that would probably be a question for the New York State Archives out in Albany.
There you go. All right, Max, thank you. Great question. And we have another one coming up for you here when we return with Extreme Genes in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. All right, we're back for our final segment. It's Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and extremegenes.com. And David is back. And David, our question now is from Leanne in Kansas City, Missouri. And she says, guys, I had an ancestor who was in the War of 1812 in the Army, and he was listed as an ensign. I thought that was only in the Navy. Is there an equivalent today? Great question.
Well, actually, you would know that rank now as second lieutenant. It did exist in the Army until the Army Organization Act of 1815. So that was an old rank that you might see in the Rev War, War of 1812, etc. But there are others that don't exist anymore. For instance, Army Cornet. That was the equivalent to a second lieutenant today, and that was for the Army Cavalry. And that lasted until 1815 as well.
Sounds like they did a little rejuggling with the ranks at that time, at the end of the war.
Yeah, and then there's ones that don't exist anymore, well, for obvious reasons. That would be like, for instance, the airship rigger second class. That existed from the 1920s to World War II, but because we don't have any dirigibles afloat currently, we don't have to worry about that. You know that the Empire State Building was actually designed for airships to dock there?
I think I knew that at one time, but I'd forgotten. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, I think there are pictures of it in the 1930s.
And there's other ranks, like, for instance, Commodore. You don't see that much anymore either. In fact, the last Commodore was George Dewey, who is largely remembered for his victory against Spain during the Spanish-American War at Manila Bay in 1898. And there's an old saying that some people still remember from that. Do you?
I think it was, damn the torpedoes, full steam ahead, or something like that.
That would make sense because there were steamships at the Great White Fleet. So it's amazing when you look at military records and you find ranks like when I had my War of 1812 discovery last Thanksgiving, my ancestor Henry Poor, I'm like, what the heck is an artificer? And I thought to myself, I didn't know what that was right off the top of my head. So I turned to Wikipedia like everybody else does. And it turns out it was somebody that was there to repair the carriages of the artillery. And that's what he was. He was a carpenter. So probably, if the cannon got hit, they had to rebuild the carriage for it or something like that. He was right there for it. So I joined the War of 1812 Society for a guy that was handy with a hammer and nail.
And see, this should be encouraging to a lot of people because we all know that David Allen Lambert is an encyclopedia of things, especially military, and he didn't know what that rank was from his own ancestors. So he had to research it just like the rest of us do.
Well, right. I mean, and this is the thing. We can't have all A to Z for everything in our head. We have to have brain space that you can fill the details in from dictionaries, encyclopedias, or in our modern day, Wikipedia.
Yeah, absolutely. Wikipedia is a great help for a lot of things. And I know there's a lot of inaccurate information there, but for factual things like that, it's not too difficult.
I find the Family Search Wiki good for researching places I don't do normally, like Czechoslovakia or Romania. I mean, I wouldn't know the first thing to do on researching that. Again, we don't know all things, and genealogy is wet cement. We're always learning.
Yeah, always learning. So that is a great question, Leanne. We appreciate that. And David, thanks for sharing your knowledge.
My pleasure.
All right, buddy. We'll talk to you again next week. And that wraps up our show for this week. Thank you so much for joining us. And thanks also to Robin LaCroix for coming on and talking about her amazing discovery about her wandering grandfather. And shall we say, the evidence that remains to this very day. And also to Steve Gruber for coming on and talking about the family lockbox that was recovered several years ago, that's now led to an incredible film about the story of his ancestors helping to rescue people from the Holocaust back in the day. If you missed any of these stories or want to catch them again, everything's on podcast. You could find it at iHeartRadio, ExtremeGenes.com, Spotify, and Apple Media. We'll talk to you again next week. Thanks for joining us. And remember, as far as everyone knows, we're a nice, normal family.